My name is Lacey Page, and I'm a junior from Christian County High School in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, and I'm a member of the Kentucky Student Voice team. Welcome to the Lexington Rose Revival hearing. We're so excited to have you here today as we explore the state of civic education in Kentucky and examine what needs to change to better prepare students for participation in our democracy. This is a unique opportunity to hear directly from experts in education, policy, and democracy, while student leaders ask the pressing questions that impact our schools and communities. As you check in, feel free to grab some refreshments and participate in our engagement activity. We have a board where you can answer the question, what are your hopes and fears about public school? Write or draw your response. We'd love to hear your thoughts. You'll also find notepads at your tables. If you have reflections or questions during the event, feel free to jot them down. While today's hearing will primarily focus on testimony from expert witnesses, we encourage you to continue the conversation with us after the event and through KSVT's ongoing campaign efforts. On behalf of our team, I want to thank you. On behalf of our team, I want to thank you for joining us today for this critical discussion about civic education in Kentucky. For those unfamiliar with KSVT, we are a youth-led nonprofit that works to amplify student voices in education decision-making. We conduct research, advocate for policy changes, and share stories to ensure Kentucky schools are just, democratic, and effective places for learning. Today's hearing is part of a larger series designed to investigate the state of civic education in Kentucky. You may have heard about the 1989 Rose v. Council for Better Education decision, which established that every Kentucky student has a constitutional right to an adequate education. That case led to significant reforms, but unfortunately, Kentucky has fallen behind in recent years. One key area where we see this decline is in civic education. So today, we're leading an inquiry into the state of civic education in Kentucky. Our core question is, what is civics education for? To help us answer this, we have invited a panel of expert witnesses to share their knowledge and perspectives. Over the next hour, our student facilitators will examine these experts, pressing for deeper insights and potential solutions. While this is not a traditional public forum, we encourage you to reflect on what you hear today and think about how we can work together to strengthen civic learning in our schools. Kentucky is one of only 11 states that does not require a civics course for high school graduation. That means many students finish school without a clear understanding of how the government works, their rights as citizens, or how they can engage in democracy. Research from our Beyond the Ballot report shows that when students do receive civic education, it often focuses on memorizing facts for a multiple choice test rather than developing real-world civic skills. We're not being taught how to engage in debates, analyze media, or understand how policies affect our daily lives. The result, many young people feel unprepared or even discouraged from participating in civic life. Meanwhile, we're seeing alarming trends in youth civic engagement. In the 2024 election, only 42% of voters aged 18 to 29 turned out to vote, a drop from 2020. And across the country, trust in government is at historic lows. Civic education has the power to reverse these trends, but only if we ensure it's engaging, accessible, and relevant to students' lives. That's why we're here today, to examine the barriers to effective civic education and to push for meaningful solutions. Our expert witnesses will help us to understand how we get here and what can be done to fix it. Next, I'll welcome Brian to lead us into our examination portion.
Thank you, Lacey. My name is Brian Xia, a junior at North Oldham High School. We are now moving into the heart of today's hearing. Testimony from our expert witnesses and examination by our student examiners. Having identified the deficiencies in civic education, it is time to move towards solutions in order to ground our vision of public education in a positive framing. Who better to give us that framework than 4 local Lexingtonians who have been working to shift our local landscape. So without further ado, I am excited to introduce our civic education experts. First, we have Sherry McPherson. Sherry is a beloved veteran educator at Fayette County Schools with over 22 years of experience. She teaches English and journalism at Lafayette High School. Her work exemplifies the importance of civic education both inside and outside the classroom, modeling the possibilities of civic education in traditional and non-traditional education spaces. Secondly, we have Vontella Thomas, otherwise, or better known as V. She is a native of Lexington. Though Lexington is her hometown, she left to attend undergraduate studies at the University of Alabama. Through a mix of experience and schooling, she has had the opportunity to work in youth development, human resources, leader dynamics, and many other fields. Now as the director of Student Y for the Kentucky YMCA Youth Association, she is tasked with ensuring Kentucky's 6,000 youth and government participants remain engaged when not at conference. Her work focuses on guiding young people through the 3 pillars of Student Y: civic engagement, servant leadership, and professional development. Her goal is for every Kentucky student to not only feel empowered to make a difference, but to have the skills and tools at their disposal to make change happen. Third of all, we have Richard Young. Richard is the founder and executive director of CivicLex, a nonprofit organization based in Lexington, Kentucky, dedicated to enhancing civic health and public participation. Established in 2017, CivicLex focuses on building civic knowledge, fostering social cohesion, and promoting responsive civic institutions. Richard's background includes a strong interest in how creative processes can positively impact democracy. Beyond his work with CivicLex, he is involved in various initiatives aimed at strengthening community engagement and civic participation in Kentucky. Under Richard's leadership, CivicLex has been recognized nationally as a model for reinventing American democracy in the 21st century. The organization offers programs such as civic education workshops, public engagement events, and resources designed to help residents understand and participate more effectively in local governance. And finally, we have Carly Muertes. Carly is an educational professional dedicated to enhancing civic education and social studies curriculum. She co-founded Common Good, a learning design company that collaborates with diverse communities to create curricula. Carly is the chair of the Kentucky Civic Education Coalition, formed in 2021 to promote civic education in Kentucky schools. She is also the former executive director of the Kentucky Council for Social Studies and a former social studies teacher in Fayette County Schools. With that introduction, our experts will now provide brief testimony about the civic work they have engaged in. Our student examiners will then engage the witnesses in examination to draw out concrete solutions and best practices.
Hey everybody, I'm Carly Muertes. So I'm excited to be talking with you all today about civics, particularly curriculum, teaching strategies, and policy. But before we really dig into it, I think it's really important to really just talk about what civics is. So everything truly is civics. Where we shop, if we can choose where we can shop. How we engage with our neighbors, our career, our job, if we have the choice in that. Everything we do is connected to civics and being a good citizen. Now that includes governance and knowledge of democratic principles as well, but we need to remember civics is broader in scope. And ultimately that brings us back to the purpose of schooling. Public schooling, but all schooling, is really about not only preparing students for their college and careers, because ultimately we don't know what young people are going to do in that regard, But we do know that all of them will be members of different communities. Everybody will be a citizen. To that end, it's of utmost importance that we prepare young people for their roles and responsibilities therein. So, to that end, science, English, math, art, music, and social studies all should be conceived of as civic subjects. But their civicness is often left pretty dormant. To be clear, all learning is and should explicitly be framed as learning to be applied, learning to prepare young people for informed engagement in their communities, whether local or global. Opportunities to actually apply what's being learned are an exception, not the rule. It's something educators all know is beneficial, but they aren't consistently given the space for their students to do so. In curriculum specifically, like I said, all subjects should be oriented towards authentic application of that content. But why? To put it another way, what's the point of learning something if not to be able to apply it? That seems straightforward enough, but schooling has been increasingly oriented towards what students can demonstrate on content-focused assessments, not on what such content means for students' lives outside of the classroom. So teachers are expected to fill their heads with information, but then push them out the door and expect them to just figure out what all that content means for understanding the world they live in. It's like having med students read and memorize their anatomy textbooks, but not providing any actual experience until they're shoved into the operating room and handed a scalpel. It's turning football practice into memorizing plays and strategies, but only entering the field for the playoff game. What good is it to teach students about any topic if not to prepare them to do something with that information? Content alone prepares them for what? Winning a trivia competition? Instruction, too, likewise, needs to evolve. So to be clear, what I'm about to say, many great teachers are already doing this, but it isn't something that is universally fostered. So while scholarship is clear about effective teaching methods, ineffective methods still reign. K-12 and higher education. Specifically, lecturing or skill and drill, which are incredibly prevalent, are not as effective as more student-propelled strategies. For example, it's well known and incredibly well documented that social studies and science have been marginalized in elementary classrooms in favor of more literacy, reading, writing, and math time. A recent study has shown that the only statistically significant factor to enhance literacy, reading, and writing scores is more social studies time, not more literacy blocks or any other of the tested variables. So why is that? Because when done well, social studies and all the other subjects are truly about meaningful, purpose-driven literacy development. How to read complex text, to contextualize them, to understand how the authorship impacts how we interpret that content, gathering and applying evidence, and using evidence to construct informed perspective. Teaching students to learn through those more authentic inquiry practices, where they ask meaningful, disciplinary questions, critically engage with varied source material, evaluate and apply evidence, not only prepares young people with the skills of their respective subject area, but also is much more effective at content acquisition. You remember more about content you did something with over something you memorized and swiftly forgot for that multiple choice exam. Likewise, more interdisciplinary inquiry further deepens students' understandings of complex phenomena and their ability to critically apply it to their out-of-classroom lives. To that end, other student-driven learning strategies include consistent opportunities for deliberation or democratic discussion in the classroom. To be clear, not all discussions are as valuable as others. Discussions grounded in just having students regurgitating content is not what I mean here. Instead, providing regular opportunities for students to anchor on their experiential knowledge, so use what they know as a grounding to learn more, as well as to engage with other students to collectively build knowledge together. Not only has this been proven over and over to lead to better social and academic outcomes, it also is directly reflective of how we expect people to conduct themselves in the real world. Put another way, students have limited opportunities to learn how to work together in a well-structured collaborative way in classrooms. Throwing students, or anyone for that matter, into unstructured group work on occasion only reinforces the idea that working together isn't worth the effort. As a teacher, I can just say anecdotally, my students hated group work for that very reason. Because one person always feels like they're doing everything else. So the problem with that is, though, that I don't know anyone, I've never been in any work environment where that skill wasn't expected. So in sum, I want to emphasize that what we're talking about here is not just learning about traditional civics content, like governance, like democratic principles, all of that is really important too. Rather, it's considering how all learning is reframed to be meaningful and applicable to students' lives, with habitual opportunities to practice that application in classroom communities. Habitual, the habits, is key. As some folks in the room know, I've spearheaded the Kentucky Civic Seal, which is a recognition program that acknowledges students who have practiced good citizenship, specifically including the designing and implementation of a civic engagement project. That is not a panacea. That is not a silver bullet. One civic engagement project, though great, everyone should do the civic engagement project, that does not actively change the relationship between students, schooling, and the real world. If everything is civics and we want students to be informed, engaged members of the communities, then schooling needs to intentionally prepare young people with the knowledge, skills, dispositions, and experiences to be able to do so. So, where are we in terms of policies, and what are the resources we need to that end? So in short, there needs to be expanded requirements and space for it in classrooms in both K-12 and higher ed. In Kentucky, as was noted in the introduction, our civic requirements are limited. While the social studies standards do identify civics as a core discipline in social studies, a civics class is not required in our state. Districts can instead choose to have their students take a multiple choice civics content test. Not only do studies show time and time again that preparation and success on such exams have no correlation to civic competencies. More anecdotally, I love to ask student and teacher groups what they think of the civics exam and if it prepared them for civic life. Invariably, I'm met with eye rolls or laughs. No, a multiple choice test didn't prepare us for that. When I have directly spoken to our state legislators about expanding requirements, the refrain is the same. We can't add another graduation requirement. It costs too much. It puts too much strain on our schools, etc. But I love civics. Civics is really important. Those same legislators will quickly say that they believe that civics is important. They are so tired of people calling and making uninformed demands of them. And yet, they can't strengthen civic requirements. Even a one-semester requirement is too much. In the just concluded session, a one-year financial literacy graduation requirement was passed. Now, the content required of that class could be taught in 1, maybe 2 months. When I saw the bill, I contacted all the sponsors and thanked them for proposing this bill. Financial literacy is incredibly important. But why don't we build it into a broader economic civics course so that financial literacy is applicable? Not just in personal household finances, but help students better understand the larger systems in which we live. What happens in city government, what happens in the economy, impacts our finances. Those who responded were encouraging, but the one-year requirement of financial literacy with no changes passed unanimously. Another indication that civics gets lip service, but is consistently not a priority to those in very civics-grounded roles. In addition to laws that demonstrate real commitment to stronger civic learning, we need requirements that are not just content knowledge. We will regularly have studies show up, including the Secretary of State's recent civic health study, that shows young people and adults don't possess strong civic knowledge. Some folks look at that and say, more content. That's an understandable connection to make. However, it does not align with what the learning sciences tell us are effective ways to learn. So what's effective? Learning content through skills-grounded processes, specifically the form of inquiry and subject area expertise that I was discussing previously, that allows students to learn content through its application, a much more effective way for students to learn content and do something with it. In Kentucky, we do have inquiry-based standards in K-12 social studies and other disciplines. However, these standards were passed in 2019, implementation in 2020. Many teachers, myself included, didn't learn through inquiry, were not taught how to teach inquiry, didn't even do inquiry till grad school. Then these big changes happened, coinciding with COVID disruptions. Teachers need meaningful supports to bring these practices into their classrooms. Now, more recently, we have a new proposed K-12 accountability system, which is promising. For those who are unfamiliar, I won't get in the weeds, but assessments are a part of a larger system of accountability at the state and the federal level, ensuring that schools and districts are upholding the educational requirements. The proposed changes hold promise as it allows for local flexibility in demonstrating student learning that reflects, quote, vibrant learning. But this is still greatly limited in terms of the meaningful learning I've discussed here. The current version of the proposed accountability system only expects students to have such experiences once per grade band, so once in elementary, middle, and high. There is limited guidance and no oversight in ensuring students receive these, quote, vibrant learning experiences. And importantly, even if those concerns of mine are suitably addressed, nonetheless, such experiences should not be the exception. They should not happen once every 4 years. They should not happen once a year, but rather be something that is consistent in students' experiences. To be clear, these are policies that need to be at multiple levels, not just at the state, but there needs to be a concerted effort in schools and districts to foster these practices. This does not mean districts just posting pictures of students on their social media pages when they do engage in these experiences after the fact. Instead, looking and building these opportunities for their schools and students. So, in sum, we need more holistic or wide-ranging policies that support and reinforce not just formal civic education content knowledge, but opportunities for application, for learning to be meaningfully and regularly applied through policies, resources, expectations, but also prioritizing space for teachers and students to lean into these practices. What I've discussed today should be priority number one instead of a nice to have in our schools. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your remarks. And to introduce myself, I am Javante Cranmo, a senior at Beechwood High School, which is in Kenton County, and I am a part of the KSVT. And to get into questioning, number one, as I am one of 3 Black students in my graduating class, I want to know, how can schools ensure that civic education doesn't just include but centers and applies the lived experiences of students like me in meaningful and habitual ways?
So that is something I'm not going to satisfactorily answer because we could talk about that for weeks. But we'll just touch on the tip of it, right? When I talk to particularly education groups on that issue, I often anchor on a quote that I didn't bring with me. I'm going to butcher it, but I'll bring the spirit of it. Is when the authority of someone like a teacher presents the world to you and you are not in it, it's a psychic disequilibrium. That you're looking in a mirror and there's nothing there. But you know this is just a game with mirrors. And I love that quote because it's so rich in how we're demonstrating to so many students that they're not prioritized, they're not seen as a part of the world, they're not seen as a part of history, and that ultimately, how relevant is schooling really if you can't even see yourself in it? So as someone who lives and breathes in curriculum, there's strategies to recenter folks who traditionally are marginalized. And we could surely get into the weeds about how to do that, how to ask questions that are authentic to not just those who have had power traditionally, but all of those who have been in the collective history that we've experienced. But also providing, like I said in part of my testimony, more opportunities for student-driven learning. There are schools that I work with in Kentucky and outside where there's 20+ languages taught in the school. So how do we make sure all of those students feel represented? And it goes back to some of the teaching strategies. If you're lecturing, then what you're doing as a teacher is determining this is the content I prioritize. This is the content that they shall learn. But if there's more opportunities for student-driven explorations, then there's more opportunities for students to not only explore the things that are interesting to them, but ultimately surface the histories that are often hidden or erased. So it's a complicated thing. That's a reorientation because no one in this room, I would guess, was taught that way. But there are strategies to do it that again are curriculum and instructional, but also dispositional, is being open to also students holding the reins of their education.
Thank you. Moving on to the second question. In a time when some in Kentucky wish to end conversations about race in our nation's history of racism, how can schools intentionally foster safe, structured, and civic-centered discourse that allows students to engage with these realities critically and collaboratively?
This is another one we could take weeks to talk about. So I'm going to talk through some just like strategies that I've talked to experienced teachers and pre-service teachers, right? Where first and foremost, you can't enter into any conversations that are emotionally charged and personal to students without first establishing trust, right? You can't expect in August when the school starts to delve into something that is charged like that. You don't have their trust, you haven't built trust in your classroom. So it begins truly on day one, even if those conversations don't begin until May. To that end, how do you build trust? Well, I don't want to talk to you like you're a teacher. There's so many ways to build trust with your students, but it's ultimately being intellectually honest and authentic. Demonstrating that you as a teacher don't know everything, but you want to engage and you want to listen to other students. And I think this is important too, and this might be controversial. I used to tell my high school students, I don't know if I told you this, but I used to say, you've been lied to, not all opinions are valuable. And what I meant by that is, I don't care if you like vanilla ice cream versus chocolate ice cream. What I mean is, opinions that say, I as a woman should not have equal rights to a man, is not an opinion that has space in my classroom. Similarly, any type of opinion that dehumanizes another person, whether someone in the classroom or outside of the classroom, that is not an opinion that has value or one that we will tolerate. However, going back to the idea of the kind of inquiry, the processes that should be in the classroom, it should be grounded in evidence and respectful discourse. So those are important components, but also it's important for teachers themselves to know the law, to know the content, again, to be humble and to say you don't know, to have administrative support. I left the classroom in 2015, so things are different now. But I made sure my administration knew everything that happened in my classroom. And then I'll finish up the answer to this too, is going back to my response to the first question, is as a teacher, and ultimately students can be conscientious about this too, but thinking about how you bring those conversations into the classroom. Sometimes they happen organically. You need to be prepared for that too, but I was speaking with colleagues recently about some of the very well-meaning framing questions of classrooms that are dehumanizing. I kid you not, I have heard many well-meaning teachers frame learning with the question, is slavery justified? And I said, why are you asking that question? The answer is no. Their response, and again, this has been multiple people, it's, well, I want students to see it's not justified. So that's not an authentic question. To historians don't ask that question. And what are you telling to the students in the classroom, no matter what their race or ethnicity? So as experts, knowing also how to frame conversations so no one is dehumanized, but instead you can anchor on questions of, well, what does fairness look like? And how can we foster fairness in our classroom and in the outside world?
Thank you. And I did want to follow up with another question.
Yeah.
You kind of briefly answered, but how can schools ensure these conversations are not only permitted but are guided in ways that prepare students to navigate civic life in diverse communities?
It needs to be taught.
Mhm.
That was not something I was formally taught. I've learned about it since I left the classroom and, studied education and pedagogy, but it's not consistently something that shows up. I'm not saying it doesn't show up, but learning how to facilitate and foster respectful discourse is a hard skill. It's incredibly challenging. And as we can look around in the world, people struggle with it. So that is one thing that students get better at it if they have those experiences, which again is limited. So students can get better at that, but teachers can also hone that skill. That can be something more prioritized again in higher ed, in teacher education programs, but also something fostered at the school and at the state level.
Thank you. And then another question I had is, in many Kentucky communities, that actually concludes our time.
Okay. Sorry, I was too verbose.
No, it's very good. So thank you very much, Ms. Buterites.
Oh, so close.
Oh.
It was so close.
You can take a seat back
Yeah,
in the
thanks.
audience, and now I'm going to pass it off to Georgie.
Hello, I'm Georgie Farmer. I'm currently a junior at Danville High School in Boyle County. I'm a proud member of the Kentucky Student Voice Team and an aspiring civics educator. We'd like to welcome our second witness, Vontella Thomas, the director of the Student Y. Welcome, Vontella.
Hello. Give me just 1 second to get my notes pulled up. And I'll start a timer, so I'm gonna try to keep myself from going over. All right, so as my introduction said, I am the director of Student Y for the Kentucky YMCA Youth Association. We are most notably known for running the Kentucky Youth Assembly and the Kentucky United Nations Assembly. So we run quite a bit of civic engagement programming during the year, and we have about 13 civic engagement conferences with 7,200 students. So I do get the opportunity to see students from all across the state, students who are educated in private schools, students who are educated in public schools, students who are educated via homeschooling, and even some students who have a combination of those. So it is a privilege to sort of get to provide a supplemental source of civic education to the education that they're receiving in whatever their respective schooling is. As I mentioned earlier, the Student Y has sort of three main focuses, and that's civic engagement, servant leadership, and professional development. We make sure that our students are prepared to be the leaders that we have trained them to be at our conferences, outside of our conferences, in the real world. The YMCA nationally sort of has a rivalry between their youth and government programs of, is it youth and government or youth in government? I'm going for in government. We have a lot of our students who go on to be senators and representatives and go on to join Kentucky Student Voice Team in the work that you all are doing. So I'm a big proponent of youth in government. I've seen a lot of the work that our students have been able to do even before they graduate, and we're really proud of them. Our group is led by an executive team of sorts. So we have a Student Y Council executive team, and they are tasked with leading the civic engagement efforts. It is really important to us that we are not determining what students want to learn or what they want to work towards, that work and their efforts is wholly led by them. So our executive team works to plan voter registration drives. We actually coordinate the Frederick Douglass Award with the Secretary of State, and those are two students who are leading that effort. We send toolkits to our schools, and we send out opportunities throughout the year in order for them to remain civically engaged. Those toolkits that I mentioned, it gives them like QR codes on how to register to vote, but it also, which I think is more important, it helps them come with a plan to vote. So we found that in our work with college students that lots of people were registered to vote, but they sort of didn't know what to do with those next steps. Or even the people who had a plan to get to the polls or who had a plan to request an absentee ballot, they didn't know what was going to be on the ballot. So after hearing that feedback, I took it back to our students, and they worked out a sample ballot. They worked with the Secretary of State to make sure that that information got out earlier and got to be updated. We were really proud of that sort of shift that our students were able to make pretty quickly just after having one voter registration drive at the University of Kentucky. We also found out for the very first time at the University of Kentucky that there were a lot of people that graduated and did not understand the difference between a primary and a general election, or we would be registering 18, 19, 20-year-olds to vote for the first time, and they would ask us what party they were. So from having those conversations on a college campus, we were able to very quickly sort of update our materials to make sure the students that we had the opportunity to interact with they weren't having those conversations 5 years from now. In addition, we were able to do some community work this year. We were able to attend the state fair alongside the Secretary of State, where they did some voter registration, voter engagement. They helped a lot of people fill out absentee ballots at the state fair, but they also had a program where they were hanging door hangers in their community. We had a handful of schools hang door hangers in Lexington alongside Ms. McPherson. The students at Lafayette were one of the schools that took us up on that opportunity. We had some schools in Oldham County, some schools in Jefferson County, some schools, I think it's Boone County, not Kenton County, that also did that. But what we were finding is as our students were hanging those door hangers, they were able to have conversations with their neighbors. They were able to have conversations with people in their community. And even though the door hangers only said, these are your voter, this is the deadline you have to be registered by, this is how you request an absentee ballot, they were actually able to talk to the members of their community on what issues were important to them, what they were hoping to see on the ballot, what they were hoping the people they were electing would champion. So they had a really good time having those conversations. And what we found is we, like I said earlier, we run Kentucky Youth Assembly. A lot of our students were taking those conversations and they were keeping it in mind for the bills that they had planned to bring to our mock conferences the following fall. One other thing that I wanted to touch on before I give a wrap up, because I quickly used all 5 of my minutes. We were able to do election protection shifts this previous election. So we actually had 53 students stationed at 6 polling locations, and they received a training from an organization called Our People, Our Vote, and they were tasked with making sure that the polling locations were civically safe, frankly, for everyone who was there to vote. So there were some people, unfortunately, who were turned away even though they were in line. Our students were there. They quickly put a call into the Secretary of State, and those people were eligible to vote, or were able to vote because our students were there. We had some students who were in, I think it's Danville, but there were some issues with the handicap parking spots being blocked outside of a polling place. And our students were able to put in a call, and they were able to make sure anyone who needed to park in a handicap spot to vote was able to do so. So they were able to keep the resources safe. They were able to help contribute to Kentucky's free and fair elections, and we were really proud of them for that. Just like a really quick overview, we registered almost 1,000 voters last year, which we're really excited about, and we're hoping to go over 1,000 voters this year. But along with our voters, we also do a pledge to register. So we get students, they submit a pledge to register, and we remind them when it's actually their time to register to vote. And I'm going to stop talking now so we have time for your questions.
Thank you for sharing your remarks. We will now move into questions. So I'm going to scoot this closer. Programs like KYA and CUNA are great ways for students to be involved in applying their civic knowledge in mock government. However, these programs cost around $300 to attend, and attending after-school meetings can be a burden for students that have work. This is especially limiting in my school district, where around 75% of the students qualify for free and reduced lunch, and we don't have a KYA program. Our CUNA was only introduced 2 months ago. How can we make civic engagement programs more feasible and equitable for all students and not be limited to just the privileged students who have the luxury of money and time to participate?
That's a great question, and that's something as a nonprofit we're always trying to fundraise more money to get more students into our programming. But what I would say, and this is maybe a hot take, but KYA, hey, that's only 3 days long. You prep for it for maybe 8 weeks, but the work of Student Y you could do all year long, and you don't have to attend the $295 conference. I used to be the person in charge of teaching students to draft bills for a conference, and I'm currently the person who's in charge of saying which bills that were submitted were drafted correctly. That is the least important part of the work that we offer to the community.
Extracurricular activities such as speech and debate, Y Club, or student-led journals have a major impact on many students' lives, myself included. I personally started my school's newspaper and am captain of our speech team. How should participation in extracurriculars factor into students' education programming?
I think there are a lot of schools, none that I can think of in Fayette County, but they've actually built in like a time spot during the day for after-school programs to meet, and I know that is of a great value and benefit to our students. So many of our students, speaking to your earlier point about how much our conferences cost, are paying for our conferences themselves, and that includes like they have jobs after school, or they have responsibilities amongst their family, or responsibilities amongst other community groups that they're a part of. So if there are ways for us to include sort of our programming more time of the school day, that's sort of how I would.
All right, it appears that we are out of time. So that concludes my questions, and the examining of this witness, sorry. Thank you so much, Ms. Thomas, and you can have a seat back in the audience. I'm going to pass it off to Ivy for the next witness.
Okay, we'd like to welcome our third witness, Sherry McPherson, an English and journalism teacher at Lafayette High School. And if you want to change your name tag, oh, you've already got it. Never mind.
Good afternoon. I'm going to tell you a story because I'm an English teacher. It's a story about a young teacher who was teaching mostly seniors. And she left at her normal time, 5, 6 o'clock, went home, and she watched the news. And she realized a policy had been changed, a policy that impacted her students. And she realized it impacted her students the next day. She was going to have to go and stand in front of all of her seniors and tell them something they had worked on for an entire year was no longer valid. It was no longer going to be used. And so sorry, too bad for you. And she didn't like that. First of all, she didn't even realize that that policy was even being entertained. She didn't have the opportunity to explain what her students would be feeling about that. Second, she's the one who had to handle the disappointed students, the frustrated students, the upset students. And then third, she was frustrated with herself because she was the adult and she should have known. She should have been more engaged. And so that started her journey on how does she become more engaged with her own community so that she can provide those opportunities for her students to give input like they should. And obviously that teacher was me. And then it led me on a journey of, I realized I didn't know. I was a very active, I thought very civically engaged. I voted in every election. I knew the issues. I could talk intelligently about them. But I didn't know the first thing about how to read a bill, how to talk to a legislator, how to get a hold of my legislators. I had no clue of any of that. So I started learning just by trial and error. And I'll just tell you, the LRC, if you've ever looked at a bill, it's just super unfriendly. It's terrible, right? But I started to figure that out. I also started to build relationships with the legislators. So I started to meet them in the community and the public, and I began to develop those relationships. Some even became friendships. And then a group of students came to me and gave me the puppy dog eyes and said, we want to do this thing called KYA. And it involves an overnight trip. And I said, no, I don't do overnight trips. That's not my thing. I don't want to do that. And the puppy dog face and the puppy dog face. And there was an adult person that worked with the Kentucky YMCA who had been a former student of mine. And she came to me and said, you'd be perfect. You're the one, we want you. So I said, I'll give you 1 year. And that first time, and I've told the Y staff this, the first time I went, and our students, we didn't know what we were doing, we were clueless. They made it onto the Capitol floor with their bill. And watching my students sit where the Kentucky legislators sit, debating an issue that they cared about, that personally I disagreed with. I mean, it was kind of funny. I didn't like their 10-year bill that they made. But I watched them grow and bloom and care about something, and I realized that we the adults were not providing opportunities that students needed. And so I began to try to think of ways that I could bring opportunities to students. Because I recognize not a lot of students, the room excluded probably, are super actively involved and know about a lot of the issues that are important to them. And so I started bringing folks in. I had the Secretary of State come and talk to the students about voting. I talked to the legislators and said, hey, would you be willing to do a forum on this bill or this issue? And they all said yes, and we did. And then I had my students run it. So that was the other thing, that's the other piece of this, is that yes, the adults kind of help with that, but also the students need to be empowered that they can take charge and that they ask the questions and that they provide the testimonies. And so that's kind of been how I've operated. I also revived our newspaper because our school newspaper had been dead and dormant about 10 years. And with that, I realized that there is no space for students to learn about media literacy. There's no natural place for that to happen. Some people think, oh, it's in the English classroom, but it really doesn't happen there. Some people think maybe social studies, but I don't think it happens there. In my journalism class, it happens. We talk about that. We look at the biased media chart. We look at, how you can be manipulated by your social media, how you can be manipulated by AI. I mean, that's a whole other issue that we've been talking about. But again, just giving students those opportunities to figure out what are their passions and providing those opportunities of bringing individuals to them. And then naturally, of course, whenever I get a chance to take students to the Capitol, I certainly do that. And then finally, just kind of looking at making sure that we also give students what I call the sliding scale of risk, right? Because not every student is ready to do what you guys are doing, right? Some students, they need a little bit more time, a little more coaching. So we talk about what is it that you feel comfortable doing? Are you willing to write an email? Are you willing to stand up and ask a question at a forum? Are you willing to talk to another student about this? Are you willing to go to the principal and ask, about this policy? Or are you the one that wants to lead the charge? You want to be the one writing the policy. You want to be the one calling the legislator and setting up the meetings. So I think there's lots of ways that we can help support students that are not naturally in the curriculum. And I think part of it is about building relationships and giving students experiences. So thank you.
Thank you so much. To quickly introduce myself, my name is Ivy Litton. I'm a senior at Brown County Senior High School, and I'm a little bit of a politics nerd. So I am curious, how can political awareness be emphasized in these classrooms without impeding on students' ability to formulate their own opinions and their own views?
So I always tell my students, we're going to talk politics, but we're not going to get political. And I have to, I have my own beliefs and my own things that I care about. And so as an educator, that's one of the things that we are censored on. We cannot really let students know what we personally believe about things. And in fact, some of us will get an email every year that says, remember this, you cannot do these things, right? And so letting students have that safe space, setting some guidelines and some ground rules. So I always tell my students, this is how we talk about that. You have to model conversations and say, I even do kind of things like, I agree with you, but I also think this, or I disagree with what you say. I think teaching students how we do that, which I sometimes wish we could do that for the adults too, but I think you have to model those conversations and you have to be willing to not be scared of where that conversation is going to go. I think right now there's a lot of fear with teachers about talking politics because we feel like we're going to get in trouble or somebody's going to, say terrible things about us on the internet. But I think we have to have those healthy spaces for students to feel comfortable. Mostly my conversations, other than the journalism class, they happen after school at the student-wide meeting. That's where a lot of those happen. So.
Yeah, absolutely. To follow up on that, what strategy specifically can you use or have you used in the classroom to ensure the students can have those open discussions, especially when there are administrators and people in positions of power who may want to limit controversial topics like that?
So I think you start with the silly, non-controversial topics, like sometimes we talk about is a hot dog a sandwich, you know, those kind of silly things. And you model and you get kids comfortable with using that format, or you get students comfortable with that format. And then you move into letting students pick the topics. So sometimes I have, you know, if it's a group of students that feel super intense about some things, I let them hand me the topics, and then I kind of go through and I pick like, okay, this one feels less intense, and then we work up to those intense ones. And then sometimes, you know, you have to say to a student, I think we have to end the conversation. You and I can maybe continue this on if it feels like it's not being productive. And I always tell students, we need to be solutions oriented. Anytime I'm talking to them and coaching them to talk to a leader, a policymaker, a legislator, the mayor, whatever, I say, you have to have a solution. We can't just go and complain. I tell my journalism students that all the time. Can't just go and complain and whine, and nobody listens to that. You need to have a specific solution. So if we're not thinking about what we can do, if it's just a gripe session, you've got to put an end to it.
Okay, I love that. To kind of pivot, in Kentucky, there isn't a formal professional development accountability system in civics education, and we all know that there is a need for one. So what kinds of professional development should teachers do to prepare them to navigate things like those controversial issues, in-class debates, media literacy, and teaching to the inquiry method?
I mean, I think, you know, when you're talking about like civic education, again, for me, the things that were the most impactful for me were the experiences. Unfortunately, sitting and listening to a presenter is not at the top of my list of things that will change my teaching style, right? I think you need to get teachers out doing the things. So, and I can't remember what the organization was, but about 15 years ago, an organization put a bunch of us teachers on a bus, and they took us around the city, and they showed us different places that students can earn, could do jobs. And it was, you know, to encourage people to go into the trades. And I didn't know there were all of these different types of options out there. So if we could make that training something like that, I don't know, maybe we go to the Capitol and you see, I don't know if people realize, when you go to the Capitol and you watch legislators and you watch the lobbyists walking back and forth with clipboards, and you really realize how our laws are created, it blows your mind. And I didn't know that as a regular, I thought, well-informed citizen. So I think we've got to get teachers having those experiences. You know, how do you teach media literacy? Me listening to a presenter is probably not the best way. You showing me, taking me to a space where I can see it in action is probably a lot more impactful.
Okay, thank you so much. That concludes the examination of this witness. But thank you so much, Ms. McPherson. You can take a seat back in the audience, and I'm going to pass it to Michelle.
Hi, my name is Michelle Zhang. I'm a senior at Elizabethtown High School in Hardin County, and we'd like to welcome our final witness, Richard Young. He is the Executive Director of Civic Lex. Could everyone please welcome Mr. Young? You can prepare whenever you're ready, or you can start whenever you're ready.
Great, thank you so much. I'm so delighted to be here with y'all. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you a little bit and to answer some questions about this really important topic. As a proud graduate of Kentucky's public school system, and someone who in my day job is trying to work to change how we understand and participate in civic life here in Lexington, I can't think of a better conversation for us to be having on how our public education system can better deliver on the promise of creating civically informed and engaged citizens. I'll start out by saying the most obvious thing. We need to teach more social studies, period. Over the past couple of decades, we've seen social studies squeezed out of the school day, especially at the elementary and middle levels, in favor of subjects that are more frequently held up. But if we want students to be informed and active citizens, they need consistent, robust experience and exposure to social studies from a very early age. Now that that's out of the way, I wanted to talk a little bit about where my organization and I'm coming from personally. I think we need to focus social studies education a little bit more intentionally at the local level. Right now, civics education largely centers national level government and history, which is important, of course, but it often feels abstract and disconnected from people's daily lives. Instead, I think we need to be focused on the level of civic life where we have the most agency, and that's the local level. The reality is that students may be too young to vote in an election, but you're not too young to advocate for a crosswalk in your neighborhood, share your vision for what this city should look like, or think critically about what kind of jobs need to be here in the future. Helping young people find agency in their own communities isn't just good for being informed and active citizens, it's also about community development. When students feel connected to the place that they are from, when they've had the experience of shaping it, even in very small ways, they're more likely to want to stay and invest long-term after graduation. Civic education shouldn't just be one of the tools that we use to support students as future voters, but as current and future members of a community with real power, voice, and imagination. I also think we need to rethink how we structure social studies alongside other subjects. Right now, we tend to silo STEM and civics as if they don't overlap, but they absolutely do. By walling these two things off, we risk dehumanizing STEM education and making students think it's all cold calculations, when in reality, STEM fields are full of deeply human, community-rooted questions, and I think we couldn't be seeing that more in the debate that we're having right now over artificial intelligence. There's also a civics side to science and engineering, whether it's the work of traffic engineers, city planners, water quality experts, or 911 operators. These are high-skilled, good-paying public service jobs that have a direct impact on people's daily lives. And we should be helping students see the civic dimensions of STEM and the STEM dimensions of civics so that they understand how the things that they're learning connect to their community. This local grounding is especially important in a place like Lexington, where 3 out of the top 5 employers in our city are civic institutions. The University of Kentucky, Fayette County Public Schools, and Lexington-Fayette Urban County Government. 3 out of the top 5. These are stable, community-serving institutions that offer real, long-term career pathways, but we rarely frame them that way. We should be lifting up public service, not just as a moral good, but as a solid, meaningful, and secure career choice. On the teaching side, we need to design curriculum in a way that doesn't make it harder for teachers to teach. I see that as shifting away from over-standardization and towards giving teachers more flexibility to tailor civic learning to their students' communities. Every Kentucky community is different and every classroom is different. And a good civic education program should allow teachers the flexibility to make space for that difference rather than constraining it. I also have to add that a lot of teachers are already trying to do this, often without much support. And the issue isn't really a lack of will, it's a lack of time, resources, and flexibility. And if we want to build civic learning that actually prepares students to engage in democracy, we need to trust and invest in the people who are doing that work. Part of all of this, though, has to be the way that school systems interact and build partnerships with community. Civic education shouldn't just be inwardly focused for individual skill development. It needs to help connect students, help connect students to their communities, and help them navigate and shape those communities. And this means connecting students directly to civic and community organizations. At Civic Lex, we've spent years working alongside local teachers to help students understand how local government works, connect them to local decision makers, and give them the space to explore their own civic voice. But we do all of that on our own dime. We are fortunate to have that ability, but not all community organizations do. School systems need dedicated funding and support to bring in external partners, local governments, nonprofits, and others that can help make civic learning real, grounded, and community-specific. These kinds of partnerships give students exposure to civic institutions, to community leaders, and to pathways that they might not otherwise know exist. Partnerships can help students understand civic life beyond voting or how a bill becomes a law. Partnerships should help students understand how decisions are made in their community and how they can be a part of shaping those decisions. That might mean students going to speak at a city council meeting, sure, but it might also mean helping them understand how to become a civil engineer or a public health official or a transportation planner. I would love to see policies that build pipelines from public education into public service. Not just in the you should run for office someday kind of way, but in the you could work in GIS at the city or become an urban forester or manage stormwater systems. There is so much civic infrastructure in our community that needs people. We should be treating civic education as a way to prepare students not just to participate in democracy, but to build and maintain our democracy. All of this means funding for internships, youth governance, participatory budgeting processes, and student-led research projects. It means building in time for teachers to take students directly into our civic institutions and bring civic leaders directly into the classroom. And it means teacher professional development that's tied to local issues and local resources. And most of all, it means creating school cultures where civic engagement isn't just an extracurricular, it's a core part of what we're preparing students to do. Civic education should show students that democracy isn't something that happens every 4 years. It's something that they're already a part of. It's something that they're a part of in their school, in their neighborhood, and in their city. And the more that we can help folks see that, the stronger our communities and our democracy will be. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your remarks. We will now move on to questioning. So my first question is, you mentioned about localizing civics education, right? I was wondering, what are some of the ways that our school systems can allow students to engage with causes and values that are important to them in their local communities?
Absolutely, that's an excellent question. Every issue that someone cares about, I think in our contemporary culture, with social media, we're often cared to really, our context tells us that we need to really care about national issues a lot, right? And international issues, global issues, right? Climate change is an excellent example, right? It's an existential crisis for many. But these issues have very local ramifications and very local ways that people can get involved. There are numerous community organizations that are addressing national issues at the local level, but often people graduate without even knowing that these organizations exist. I think there's real room for partnerships between community organizations that can benefit from new ideas that come from young people. Community organizations benefit by building future constituencies as young people grow up and understand the value and importance of civic infrastructure in our community. And also working with community organizations and working at the local level, both with community organizations, but also through the policy process, gives students a real sense of voice and agency over the decisions and the way that are the decisions that shape their community and the way that those issues play out.
Thank you. And then my next question is just a little bit different from the first. We've established that one way for Kentucky students to fulfill the civics requirement is to complete the naturalization test, which wasn't necessarily designed to measure civic skills or learning, but rather was just memorization of information. I remember at the end of my freshman year, I was told not to prepare for the exam. It tested incredibly basic civics knowledge, and I finished within less than 15 minutes. This leads me to ask you, what skills and knowledge should we be teaching young people through civics education, and how should these skills and knowledge be assessed?
I think we need to help students understand how to participate meaningfully in civic life. That to me, what is the point of teaching civics? What is the point of teaching social studies if it's not for application? If it's not for being an active member of your community? And when you start to think about what does it mean to be an active member of your community, that changes what you should necessarily be learning. I think people need to learn how to find and to understand and use accurate information locally. I think people need to learn how to engage with folks in their community, engage with folks that they may disagree with in their neighborhoods, but may have a shared and common interest. They need to know how to navigate local government, right? And that, I think, in a formal sense, how to speak at a city meeting, right? How to effectively advocate for something you care about, but also how to call 311 when you see a pothole in your street that is continually giving you a flat tire. We are not equipped as residents of this community, and same for almost every community in the United States, we are not equipped to, given the skills and equipped to engage in everyday civic life. And I think that part of that is technical skills, right? Like I just mentioned, but part of it is also what is frequently referred to as the sort of habits of hearts and minds of what it means to participate and be a part of a community. In terms of assessment, to me, it's really about practice, right? Assessment should be, can you actually, create some sort of a project and present it to a council member or present it to an elected official? Can you work on an issue that is really important to you in your community? that is the direction that I think we need to be taking people towards. What does it mean to actually be a member of our community?
All right, that concludes our time. Thank you so much for answering my questions. You may now join the audience.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to pop this out of here. It's easier for me to speak this way. Well, thank you all. Can we have one more round of applause, please, for our experts today? I'd like to ask you all one concluding question and give you all each the time to respond to it, to give us your conclusion on what you are wanting for the future of Kentucky. So, my question to you is, if you were a student today in Kentucky's schools, what is the one change, the one solution that you would want to see for your success, for your future that you think will be the most impactful for you? Any of you all can go. You can work it out amongst yourselves. Thank you.
Can we huddle?
Yeah. Okay. Should I just use my teacher voice, or do you want me to grab
the mic?
Okay.
If you guys want to pass it around,
Oh,
whatever
that's
works.
good. Okay, so I can sit back here with my pals. It would just be consistent opportunities to apply what you learn in the classroom. Because again, I reference this, but I had students ask me, why are we learning this? And my goal is for students to never have to ask that again.
I'm going to say learn to build relationships with people. There are not any faceless issues. They're just issues that you have not yet experienced. So constantly being exposing yourself to people who are different than you.
I would probably say that connections matter, that making a connection with an issue, making a connection with a person, making a connection even with what you personally think and believe is really important, and that leads to change in our community, change in yourself, but also can lead to lifelong passion and lifelong vocation.
For me, I think it's helping folks understand that the sort of your everyday lived experience of being in civic life, right? I think a lot of people think that decisions just sort of happen arbitrarily and things are the way they are for no particular reason. But if you've ever sat in traffic, or if you've ever been walking down the sidewalk on a hot day and wishing for shade, if you've ever been trying to find a particular thing you care about, but there's nowhere near you that carries it, all of those are parts of civic life, and they're decisions that shape every single one of those things. Every single aspect of everything around us is being shaped by policy, and a lot of that is at the local level. And I think that if people knew how surprisingly simple it was to shape the environment around them, I think more people would be encouraged to do it.
All right, well, thank you all. We have the opportunity now. To have you all ask some questions. We've gotten to ask our fabulous witnesses what they think about the variety of issues that we feel important as students, as part of the Kentucky Student Voice team. Now I'd like to invite you all to ask questions. Whatever you have, what has prompted your mind in this discussion, what seemed important to you, what do you want clarification on? Now is the time. Please raise your hand. We'll try to pass a mic around to you to get that worked out. Yes?
I don't need the mic.
You got it.
Thank you, though. Okay, I do. All right. So hi, I'm Judith Bradley. I am a special ed advocate. Anyway, my question, though, is not pertaining to special education. In 2008, there was a bill passed in Kentucky that permitted the teaching of the Holocaust. And the bill was called the Ernie Marks Holocaust education bill. This was permission to teach. I know about this because Ernie was my stepfather. 10 years later, in 2018, there was another bill, and it kind of changed names, that actually requires teaching about the Holocaust as well as genocide in our schools, public schools. My question is for students and the educators and others, how are we doing with this? Is it happening? And obviously it's a very personally important topic to me, but more broadly, I think it's also something that reflects the degree to which we are integrating and using the legislative process or not. So sometimes I get a little nervous about let's get them to pass the bill to do this, when maybe it's not being enacted. So number one, is it happening? Two, what role should future legislation take, if any, in helping to correct this problem? Thank you, Rachel.
Anyone want to take it? Might call on our representative if nobody does, so.
Well, have any of you students received any education in any of your courses regarding the Holocaust? Let's start with that.
I can share. So I don't know the specifics of the bill, like of age requirements, but I think I was taught at a school level about it not until sophomore year, which is, I don't know if it's supposed to be before then or not.
It's middle and high school.
Okay.
Is the requirement.
I don't think I learned about it in middle school. Part of that is it was the COVID era. And also, I don't know if I've had a history class that really gets past the Civil War.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know about anyone else. But I mean, it was talked about in class. It was probably a 1 or 2 day thing. And I think my teacher handled it really well. It was definitely difficult knowing some of the students in my class have had a history of saying things that are not appropriate with that topic. But I think it at least was handled well at my school, which is good because it is a small school and it's a pretty diverse school. But I don't know about other people if they've had very different experiences, but to me, it was not officially introduced in the school system until my 10th year at public school.
I'm just gonna mostly echo what Georgie said. I think I don't think I learned anything about it in middle school. And then my freshman year, it was more, my social studies class was like kind of vaguely about the United States government. And then sophomore year I took APUSH, and so we like touched on World War II from, you know, the United States perspective. And I've been dual credit since then. So a combination of COVID perhaps and that, but I never really got taught about the Holocaust, at least not for any extended period of time that I can remember. So I don't know if Michelle has a different story.
I can echo the same. I took AP US History, and that was when we learned about the Holocaust in depth. However, I do have to say, with current day politics, with Israel and Palestine, my teachers are very cognizant about how political the issue is, and I'm taking AP Government now, and last year, towards the end of my APISH class, my teacher did go into it a little bit, but we did not cover it to, like, it wasn't very detailed in the information that we were taught, and they both were leaning towards one side of the whole conflict. They didn't teach anything about what was happening to the Palestinians in the conflict. And that experience also has led me to, I attended the summer program right after my junior year, and one of my instructors was a Palestinian student at Columbia University, and she had shared with us all of her experiences as a Palestinian student there, and also her family back home, and that's where I really learned that side of modern day politics. I feel like at school we're taught, from my experience, one side of current day politics or history, so yeah. Hope that answered your question.
Thank you.
Is there anything else that our witnesses would like to add, either about that specific bill or about the more general process of how legislation trends into the classroom?
So this won't be fully satisfactory. When I was executive director of the Kentucky Council for Social Studies, we regularly had advocates asking us about this. And full disclosure, I have a master's in German studies, and my focus was Holocaust and genocide studies, so I care. And my response at the time, pre-2020, was that is something I can guarantee is being taught, because I had it a bunch as a student. I saw it as a classroom teacher. That was anecdotal, but what I saw was it was always being taught. I can't speak to what it looks like now. Was it you, Ivy, who said, or Georgie, COVID, that kind of changed what we learned. I think the challenge, I would say, is not how do we approach it legislatively, but how do we provide the resources and we further embolden people to feel they can talk about it, and talk about connections to the modern era. Again, why learn about the Holocaust if not thinking about how do we look at and address genocide when we see it. There's a great book by Samantha Power, Problem from Hell, where she says, we said never again after the Holocaust. Every chapter was when it happened again. So I think, and my buddy here, Helena, reminded me that UK has, what's the name of the program? Holocaust Education Initiative. They're doing a lot of great work to kind of prepare teachers as almost ambassadors to create and teach. And I think those kinds of programs where teachers are emboldened, given the skills to create and then teach is one of the best pathways. Legislatively, it's quit putting restrictions on teachers about what they can't teach. I mean, the bill got reworded differently, but a couple years ago there was a bill to forbid the speaking of current events. So when teachers are scared about saying, I believe this on this thing, then they're going to avoid everything that is even slightly potentially going to lead to a teacher phone call. Yeah, I think I want to hear Representative Dunworth.
Hi, I'm Ann Donworth. I'm state representative for the 76th district. I'm actually here as a parent, not as a state rep. But one of the things that we had this legislative session was, and I'm going to blank on the joint resolution name, but there was one that was specifically to address anti-Semitism in the university setting. It was really complicated bill, resolution, and some members of the Jewish community really wanted it and others did not. I ended up, full disclosure there as well, I did not vote on that one. The fear was that, so the root cause of the bill, there's been, I think, like 30, don't quote me on the number, but I think about a 30% increase in incidences of anti-Semitism on college campuses in the state of Kentucky over the last few years. So on the surface, the resolution was to try to address that. The fear also is that we had a lot of current events happening nationally where we have Palestinian protesters who are being accused of being terrorists. We had an incident at the state capitol where one of my colleagues accused someone who was there to testify of being a terrorist because he was wearing the black and white scarf. So it's a very fine balance of, are we going to use this as a way to suppress other people's rights, or are we doing this as a way to really teach people how to live? And so that's the fine line. I don't think we found it here, but that's where things are now.
Thank you. And I'll just say that one of the reasons that I think that it is important is directly related to civics and not as much history, because when you do learn about what happens with that genocide in particular and others, you begin to understand and see the role of each individual, including civil servants who facilitate. So that's actually a big part of my interest in ensuring civics education for many reasons. So thank you.
Mic, guys. All right, well, thank you all today. I'd like to conclude with some brief remarks about this forum and what we've learned today. So today we've heard from the best. We've heard from the people who are in our community, who are presenting us what the future can look like. And I want to talk about two things that stuck with me today that are really going to kind of percolate through my mind as I go into the last several months of my high school career. My name is Peter. I'm a senior at Henry Clay High School here in Fayette County. And I first want to touch on one of the facts that we came up with today. Everyone will be a citizen. Every student, every person who may be, who is not civically engaged, who is working to be civically engaged, we are all citizens. Every student will have the opportunity to do these things. And that means that we have to be deliberate. For civic engagement, practice makes perfect. Forging experiences in the classroom that are authentic, that present every student with a mirror image of themselves in history. Using inquiry-based learning to create a classroom environment that leaves people with knowledge that is useful beyond circling A, B, C, or D. And outside the classroom, bringing civic engagement close to home. Creating civic opportunities that are by students, for students, that forge and create the kind of citizens that we want to see in our future. For civics and social studies, it is imperative that we have more policies. If there was one common thread I could pick out between our speakers today, it was that our future relies on civics. It relies on more support for civil discourse, for engaging respectfully for those who we disagree with, for needing support from those who are in power to advocate for more policy on social studies, more time, more deliberate time in the classroom, more engagement at the local level in empowering students to learn their own way, to forge their own path, to open their own door to a more civically engaged life. And at the end of the day, our future is uncertain. We live in a time where the next few weeks seem like they could bring a vastly different world, one that is scary for many people. Today we saw a glimpse of what could be, what can be, and what must be for the future of civics and for the future of our state. As we strive to construct a more vibrant and engaged society, and strive to continue to focus on the constitutional right of students in Kentucky to be civically engaged, to have the 7 capacities that we are guaranteed, I feel hopeful knowing that we have a blueprint for change. Thank you. Thank you, Peter. As we close today's hearing, let's give it up one more time for our expert witnesses, our student examiners, and of course, all of you for being here. Especially on a March Madness Saturday. We hope you leave this hearing with a renewed sense of what is possible in Kentucky schools. Kentucky's Constitution makes clear the right every student has to receive an education that prepares them to become an active citizen in our democracy. If we listen to the advice of the amazing witnesses who spoke today, we'd go a long way to providing that right to every student. If you're interested in continuing to staying connected with the Kentucky Student Voice Team, we encourage you to scan the QR code at each of your seats. That will take you to our Rose Revival webpage, where you can find multiple calls to action, including endorsing the campaign, an op-ed writing toolkit, and a forum where you can share your education story. In the coming months, we will be traveling throughout the Commonwealth, hosting hearings just like this one on a variety of topics related to public education.
However, on May 13th, we will be in Frankfurt for a different kind of hearing. KSVT v. Commonwealth, our lawsuit against the state, will have its first hearing at the Franklin County Circuit Court to determine whether this litigation can move forward with student plaintiffs. We want to pack the courthouse to show the judge and the rest of Kentucky that students, educators, and adult allies alike are ready for transformational change in our education system. Thank you again for showing up and standing with students. Please feel free to come speak with any of the student examiners and expert witnesses. And please, let's not let any of those snacks go to waste.